This conference will now be recorded.
Matt, you have your mic on mute.
There we go. Thank you, Steve. Looks like we're being recorded. I'd like to call the Invest in Willmar board meeting to order for Wednesday, December 9th, 2020. We'll do a little roll call. Sawatsky. Ammon. Konal. Anderson.
Here.
Bob Pohl's gone. I believe he did RSVP. Council Member Muskie.
Here.
Council Member Nelson.
Here.
And our Honorable Mayor Marv Calvin.
Hey, Matt, do we have a quorum?
Looks like John just popped on. So I've got myself, Ammon, Konal, Anderson, Muskie, and Nelson. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe. Any proposed additions or deletions to the agenda as presented? Could I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved. Second.
Motion made, seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All in favor, signal by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries. Next up, motion to approve the minutes from September 9th, 2020.
I'll move approval.
I can second.
I got a motion that's been made and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion? All in
Matt?
favor? Yes.
I believe you said September 9th when it should be November 18th minutes.
Sorry. Thank you, Janelle.
Welcome.
Motion amended and approved for November 18th, 2020. Thank you. All in favor by signal by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries. We'll move to the agenda. Item number 1. It looks like we are looking at updates from subcommittees. And first up, we've got Robbins Island. Do we have anybody here representing Robbins Island that would like to give an update? Okay, why don't we put that aside in case Gretchen or somebody pops on, and we'll move to recreation fields. The chair of the recreation fields, John, I believe that's you.
I can give you guys an update on with our subcommittee. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. We've had 2 or 3 subcommittee meetings, and we've had 1 meeting with our architects once we got resumed and to be able to move forward. We kind of came down to 2 phases for our project. Phase 1, our priorities are to complete the softball youth baseball complex, to get the 2 turf fields laid down, and then also put lights on both of the turf fields. We have some alternates in there as well about lighting one of the softball fields, scoreboards, and dugout or dugouts, depending on funds and things. So those are a few alternates we have for the softball youth baseball complex. Phase 2, we're hoping that our project will be under budget with this, and then phase 2 using monies that are left over, depending on operational costs and the appetite for the city council to move forward. Phase 2 would be putting up the bubble and the infrastructure with that. So we've had our meetings. Rob's been visiting with the architects and moving things forward for us, and we're hoping to get our city meeting with the community meeting here coming up after the first year, if everything is in order. And then going through the process with the different committees, and hopefully we can get things bidded out, if everything moves smoothly, sometime February, March, depending on the process with everything. So with that, I don't know, Tony, if you want to chime in on anything from there with our committee and any questions that you may have.
I would just add one thing. We were able to speak with the stormwater subcommittee, and we're going to combine and share costs for movement of water in the rec fields area so that we don't have negative implications downstream for the city of Willmar. And as we spoke at previous meetings, City Administrator Gramitz and Finance Advisor Okens said that that's perfectly legal. And so we think that's a nice way for our subcommittees to work together, but also to save some costs as we look towards phase 2 to get the bubble to continue moving forward on that.
Any other questions? Sean.
Yeah, John, I got a question. Your subcommittee came up at the city council meeting last Monday, and it was a discussion about feedback that you received from the Public Works Committee. And then there was some discussion about our process of how we bring things to the council. My question for you was that meeting productive for you? Is it good to use some of those committees as a sounding board going forward? Because there seems to be a lack of some consistency of moving those things forward. I personally did not care. I just wanted to hear from you as the chair, was that a productive process? Because if it isn't, I wouldn't want to repeat it. But if those committees are helpful, I think we could continue to do so. Just your perspective. Sorry. Yeah.
One thing that we were our committee was kind of stuck on is with the times that we're living in with the pandemic and things, and unknowing of future city budgets and the cost of operating a bubble throughout the year. And Rob put together some numbers for that, and then also some revenue generating numbers as well. We just felt that we need to have some more input on the direction we can go to, because that would significantly change our project. And then getting more numbers in on what the bubble actually costs with the budget that we have and the different electrical and the infrastructure that you needed to do. It was good to have that information, just to kind of get their perspective on things. And we just, with our committee, the bubble was a big priority for them, but having all the blueprint, so to speak, laid out for the future, that we thought maybe we should put it into 2 different phases and use any money that we have left over towards kind of a down payment towards that. So yeah, it was useful. Tony, do you want to add into that at all?
Yeah, I would agree with what John said, Councilmember Muskie, just because we don't want to put up a structure and then we have no way of financing it or operating it, and then that would be a total misuse of funds. The other thing that we learned, like John was saying, we had talked about just putting in the grade beam for the bubble and waiting for funds to come. But we learned from our architect and our consultants that the technology is changing, and there's a new company coming out that has a lighter and maybe as strong or stronger, that maybe doesn't need as much infrastructure. So that was a great learning process for us, and hopefully we can see the benefit of that down the road. But we definitely needed the guidance so that we could direct our project and to make it fit in the budget.
I appreciate those answers. That's what I was hoping to hear. There was some confusion about maybe what happened at that committee, but I think you've clarified it very well. So I'm glad to hear it was helpful.
Thank you. Audrey.
Thank you, Matt. My comments were kind of along the same thing as to just clarifying the process and even what we're doing tonight. I appreciate what you've brought back, what you're talking about with the phases, and I'm just wondering if the documentation that you shared can be attached to these minutes today so that it gets to the full council again with that documentation. But I was also going to ask Mr. Gramitz if there's anything else. Do we need to put our seal of approval as the local option sales tax committee on what they're doing now, or will that come later? Just trying to seek clarification of the process as it was discussed the other night, and wanting to be positive, because I think what they're moving forward with will help us to accomplish all things by the time we're done with this. And so that's a good thing. So just curious.
Matt, I'll try and answer that question or comment. Yeah, I think, you know, the Public Works meeting was, again, like a little sounding board. You know, we have a question. Initially, I had you know, had discussions with Rob about, hey, the subcommittee's got a job to do. Go do it. You know, cut your budget down so it matches your funding revenue, and let's move forward. But you know, in that process, it was, no, we really do want to know. We need some help. We need some guidance. We'd like to have somebody talk with us a little bit. That's what I was hearing. You know, it may not have been, you know, super loud, but it was, we want to talk to somebody. And because this has greater implications. So, okay, now having said that, we've gone through that process. Now I believe it's up to the subcommittee to, you know, finalize the plans, make its reports to the Invest in Willmar, you know, main committee. But then when they're ready to trot their project out in front of the public, gather the public information on what they've done, and then take it through the process as was identified earlier, which was, you know, Park and Rec, public, or, you know, Invest in Willmar, public, notice to Park and Rec, then Public Works, then City Council. You know, and, you know, this was just a little blip to help satisfy some concerns earlier, you know, with Public Works. That's been done. Now their job is to fit their project into their budget, and then we revert back to the normal process again. So, you know, this is a hard thing, you know, for some of us that have been in government for 40 years. We go like, yeah. Just go to this committee and this committee, and, you know, you bounce around a little bit, and it all, you know, works in the end. But, you know, I try and remember and kind of, you know, keep in mind that this is a collective group of citizens who probably, this may be their first ever foray into how things work. And, you know, not good, not bad, just it's a learning experience. So I think we're on track. You know, I think we had good discussion at the council meeting, but I think it probably, there were concerns that were probably expressed that weren't necessarily the foundation for why the issue was brought before Public Works. It was just a simple, you know, kind of a sounding board thing. And so the process will continue. I think, you know, having John and Tony, you know, work with the architect. The architect knows what he has to do. Matter of fact, today, Rob and I had a discussion with the architect about the contract that we still have to ink and pen, but we've got that nailed down, so we'll get that taken care of. So everything is, you know, working its way through the process. The only negative, quite simply, is that, you know, the underestimation of how much things cost is obviously creating a lot of havoc. You know, instead of, you know, if the rec fields had $8 million, we probably wouldn't be having these discussions. But they've only got 6, so they've got to work through that. And I'm looking forward to what they come up with. And I think it'll be a, you know, any move forward is a good positive step forward on this.
Thank you, Brian. And I think that might have been specific to try to get some feedback on the dome and that too as well, I believe. So that's my understanding. Any other questions? Comments? Anything, Tony or John, you want to add to what you presented. Is there anything else? Okay, so back to process. It goes from us to Park and Rec to either Finance Committee or Public Works Committee, and then to Council. So are you guys going to come back and present specifics then at some point? I'm just asking a question here that you want us to take a look at, or just so we're clear back to what Audrey said, just so we're trying to at least put the effort into staying on the same page. What is your plan, John or Tony, at this point?
Well, right now, we've nailed down our priorities after the information that we've got from the Public Works, and our committee, and we kind of have our priorities set now that we want to do, and we were going to move them forward to the architect so that he can design. I don't know all the terminology on what phase they're in, but we have our priorities set, and we are ready to move forward for him to design it, and then once we get that, I guess the next step would be to have our public meeting and then kind of go through the process, or if I'm off, then we're ready to go to the architect and have him design it. That's where we're at right now, Matt.
Okay, so back to, I think basically, like Robbins Island and whatnot, do you guys, I mean, you guys are ready to go to the architect. What's the next step? Go ahead, Audrey.
Well, that's kind of my question. And what I heard Brian say is that when they are ready, they will come back for approval from this group and then go through the process. And so that's what I'm trying to understand. I mean, you presented to Public Works, but we're not looking at the documents tonight. We're not talking about the design. And I think this group needs to put that seal of approval on. Isn't that what I understood, Mr. Gramitz?
Well, I think if you go back enough meetings, what I heard was that the Invest in Willmar group was telling the subcommittees to go do your projects. You know, that they were not going to run herd over making decisions on the subcommittee's projects, you know, and that when you're done, you know, just out of courtesy, you know, one would think that you would, you know, call a meeting, you know, or have a regular meeting, whichever works the best, and say, here's the explanation of our project. We're going to be presenting it next week to the public for their input. And if everything is good, if nobody has any red marks they want to put on there, then it proceeds to Park and Rec and Public Works, Finance, whichever. And the reason I say whatever on Finance and Public Work is simply whatever committee is meeting first, so we don't slow down the whole process, kind of a thing. You know, like if Public Works isn't going to meet for a month because they don't have anything, then we substitute another committee to keep this thing moving forward, so we get to the bid date, you know, on time. So there's a little bit of flexibility in there, but generally speaking, if I remember right, what I heard, you know, Matt kind of say was, you guys go do your projects. We're not going to, you know, monitor you. But I think looking at when you're done, here's our project, just like Robbins Island did. I think they came back and said, here's our project. They didn't necessarily say, what do you want us to change? You know, they weren't asking for input in that manner. They were just saying, this is what we came up with.
Well, I don't want to go through another meeting like we did Monday night. And I truly believe that this committee deserves a good hard look at it, just like Public Works did, when it's ready to go, and that we can present it to the council that the local option sales tax put their seal of approval on this. And maybe I'm not thinking correctly, but I'm not sure that anybody else has looked at the design of, you know, with what we got at Public Works. And I do think this committee should have that opportunity to support it. And if that means a special meeting, then we do a special meeting.
I don't have any problem with that.
Sean.
Well, this will probably be, if not my last meeting, one of the second to last meetings. So I guess I will tell you my understanding of how these things have gone through is that this committee is to present a coherent plan with alternatives and list them down in priority. And when we started it, Robbins Island was our first test case for that. And it maybe wasn't as clear, but then we did clarify, and those buildings were seen as the lowest priority. But I don't think we were on this committee trying to create that listing at this level. We're letting the committees do that. And then our job is to forward the best presentation to the council, who then dealt with the finances. When they dealt with the Robbins Island project, it was very nice as a council member to say, okay, here's the budget of it, and here's the alternatives, and those alternatives don't fit in that budget. So it was easy to say those aren't going to get done now. What I'm hearing from John and Tony now is that they've done that, and they're bringing that forward to the architect. And if all of a sudden the bubble's at the bottom because of the ongoing expense, that I think is the information the council needs to then say, well, the budget's here and you've got this extra, so that part is going to be deferred or explored some other way. I thought we went through many weeks of saying, committees, please put those in priorities so the council can make those financial decisions later. I don't feel comfortable at this level trying to tell a subcommittee to fall within the parameters of a modified budget, because that's not, I didn't ever think that that was what the goal of this committee was. To me, this committee was to make sure that these subcommittees had their priorities clearly delineated, so when it moves to a council, they can deal with that financial decision there. It may not be the decision anybody likes in the committee if they cut certain things, but trust me, I've heard that on a previous thing. But that is how I viewed it. If we're going to make that decision here and start to cut things here, I think that would be a problem. I don't know if anybody's suggesting that, but I don't think we should do that. It sounds as if this committee's got the priority listing in place and ready to go. The financing of that's going to come at a council meeting at a later date. But that's at least my interpretation of how this goes, and I think it should continue that way. My 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
So-
So ahead,
So are
sorry.
you saying it should come back to us before, so that everyone on this group can see it? Because that's what I thought this group was supposed to be, the sounding board before it goes to the other. And I'm not saying cut, I'm not saying make decisions, I'm saying on awareness. And that's what I heard the other night, that there was a concern about where we were going and how we were getting there. And all I'm trying to do is clarify so that we don't have to go through this again.
If I may, I'll ask my fellow councilor. The question is, what do you need to see? I guess is what I'm asking, because I heard a priority listing. Because I don't think we're going to see the designs of these things, because that has to happen when they meet with the architect. Are you asking to see a delineated list of priorities?
So did you look at the information that was presented to Public Works? Did you? Because all I'm saying is I think that information, when they are ready to go, should be presented to this group. And yes, we're going to bring it forward and it's going to go through the financial and all of that. But there was a lot of great information and a lot of hard work in there. And if we're going to support that, we're going to support the work of the committee, I think this group should do that as a whole.
Dennis, please.
I tend to agree with Audrey. I think maybe what was missing here is, it seems like Public Works had more information than what we've seen. And perhaps the way to get around that is just include some sort of written documentation when we have our monthly meetings or something. Because I think we deserve to know what's going to the council, so that we can at least be informed. We're not asking for anything except what's out there for information. And I'll tell you, frankly, I feel a little bit out of the loop as to what I listened to the discussion Monday night, and I was kind of confused during the whole thing. So I just think it's an information thing that we need to clean up a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here for a second. I'm going to just for a second here. Okay, so what Sean said is correct. It's not our job to micromanage and try to control the subcommittee. I've already tried to do that once a couple of months ago. It didn't work, okay? So we're not trying to do that. Sean's right. Dennis's comment is that was my understanding specific to the dome, if they should try to do that or not, because it's going to impact the city budget. So I believe they were just trying to get a little information on the appetite for the expense of running a dome right now with what's going on. So I believe it was specific to that. And Audrey's right too. We got to go back to just the same thing that Rachel did. And actually Mary did this too, where John and Tony, you guys got to come back and throw your architect on a window here, whether it's next week or tomorrow or whenever. Once that architect's done, it goes through us, then it goes to public, then it goes to the Park and Rec, then it goes to Public Works, and then to City Council. So that's the process that we have. Nobody's right or wrong. I'm just saying we got to stick with what we did with Robbins Island and whatnot. So that little sneaking into Public Works was just to get some feedback specific on the dome. That's more of an operational budget thing that doesn't really affect us. So there was that's where we're at. Audrey.
You may not think, but I'm trying to defend these guys also. They did a great, the presentation was very good. And for this to be a positive project in the community, I don't want to go through another Monday night where we're tearing things apart because we didn't do 1, 2, 3, 4. We did 1, 4, 3, 2. And I do believe that this committee has put a lot of work into it and that it would be worthwhile for its stamp of approval on the great work that these guys have done and how they're looking at it and what they're hoping to do in the future. And so that's all I'm saying is that if we follow this process, we can, if we have to have a special meeting, have a special meeting. I don't care.
Go ahead, Sean.
Well, let's close the loop. I mean, if it's just to present the information, what the plan is, I am absolutely supportive of that. But what I do not want to do is micromanage the decisions of that committee. And so we're on the same page if we can all agree to that, because what I heard, and now Dennis, I was just about as much in the dark as you were, and I was sitting at the table. So imagine that frustration. But in essence, as you're looking at how these things were unfolding, if we follow that process, it will be fine, because instead what I heard was accusations of the Public Works Committee saying up or down whether or not there can be a bubble. And I'm like, that is definitely not what happened. And that's why I was waiting for this committee to hear it from the chair of the committee. It was a sounding board, and that is a total acceptable thing to do. They needed that information, but there's that lack of communication was happening at some level, and it got twisted, and people were talking about decisions being made at committees that would trump our subcommittees of the local option sales tax, and that's a problem. And so if we can avoid that in the future, maybe when those committees are meeting and using a sounding board, just to relay that through Matt, perhaps you, and then everybody understands they were just talking to them to learn about, in this case, the expenses of the bubble, because that turned into something that shouldn't have been. And I was ill-informed because I'm not part of the Public Works Committee. But if we're just going to share the plan here and not micromanage the plan, that's exactly what I think this committee is supposed to do.
Okay, John, is your hand up? Yeah, John, go ahead. Sorry.
So I guess what I'm hearing is before we have the architect design our project, you guys want to see on paper what our list of priorities and alternates are and our phases. Is that what I'm hearing? Because we have that information for you. We just don't have it, and you just don't have it in front of you. But is that what you're looking for before we get to the design of the project with the architects? Is that what I'm hearing? Because we do have that information for you.
Well, I mean, I think any communication is good, John, but I don't recall seeing that from Robbins Island or Swanson. So I mean, I think if you want to share that, I think that'd be good, but I don't think we got any of that before Robbins Island went to the architect. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? I think you guys are the experts. Go.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think once you've got your display boards, you know, where you've got 6 or 7 sheets of visuals that show the 4 softball field, baseball diamonds, how it all lays out, where everything is. To me, that's when you bring that back and say, here's our project. And here's what we didn't get to do because these were the higher priorities. And in essence, you've gone through the architect already. You've put the project almost to bed, and you're coming back to this group and saying, here's what we came up with. Here's what it looks like. And that's what Robbins Island did. They put it all together. They had 5 or 6 slides to show, and they went, here's our project. And everybody went, looks good, move it forward. And so that's, there's a lot of work has to get done yet before we get to that point. So I don't think this is like next meeting's information, unless you can get the architect to draw it all up and put it together. But I think it's the first step in the process when you got all your stuff together. When you've got something to show us and say, here's what we did, here's what it's going to look like, what do you think? Those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, Brian. Audrey?
I'm not disagreeing with him, but I think it would be good for this group. The information you shared at Public Works was good. Why is it not being shared with this group? Let's do that and cross the T's and dot the I's so that we don't have that. We also had a discussion the other night about Robbins Island with why the council level cut something that had been approved. And, there was a motion made and a second and we voted and it was done when there was a possibility of doing something different. I don't want that to happen again, but I do think that this group deserves the information to be brought along so we can bring the community along too, because it's positive, it's not negative.
Thank you, Audrey. So let's plan on that. Why don't, if you guys want to keep us updated, do you have any scheduled times where you think the architect's going to be working on it, John, or where are they? Are they just starting? Are they in the middle of it? When can we take a look?
Rob, I don't know. You might know a little bit more about where the architect is with this in your discussions.
Currently, the WSN is in the design development phase. They have the schematic design already done about how the fields would all lay out and everything like that. So they're in design development on this project. So there will be this project will go fairly quick. So I expect to see something from the architect as more of a finished product that we can send through the process here fairly shortly.
Okay, John, Tony, anything else that you have, thoughts, comments? Otherwise, I think that everybody's on board. We'll just kind of wait to see a few things and see specifics from the architect. Is that, and if you have stuff on the front end, that's great. I think people like to see stuff. Any questions for you guys? Tony?
Yeah, we'll just we'll send our priority list and Rob's PowerPoint with the schematic design of what the Civic Center area looks like, and we'll include that in the minutes for today, and you guys will see that, okay?
Sounds good. Appreciate it. Anything else on this topic? Audrey?
Just, it would be great if you'd send that out to the committee because the minutes won't be seen for a month or more. So I would appreciate if they were attached to the minutes, but I think it would be helpful for this group, especially with the conversation that took place the other night, to see the same information that Public Works did.
Sounds good. Thank you, Audrey. Okay. Let's move on to the next next topic, and let's go to the event center. Gretchen, welcome. Any update on your project?
Pretty short and sweet. We are in design and development and have really just a little bit of tweaking to do from the last design that we got from our architects. So we're really, really close to the end. And then that whole discussion that just happened was good information to me too, because it sounds like once we have done that, we'll bring it to this group. And our hope, of course, was that our community meeting would be sometime yet this month. So it's potential that we would ask for a special meeting of this group so that we could go through our design with you before we move to that community meeting. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Thank you, Gretchen. And any questions? Audrey, did you raise your hand?
Yes, just like the operational costs were an issue for the field. I think that's as a council member, that's going to be my biggest concern with whether we can afford to do this project right now or not. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that that information is being brought forward also with the what the expectations are for operational costs or the time frame with that.
I guess my question will be then, is that a Rob thing? Where do we get, how do we know what those numbers will be? I mean, who put that together for the rec fields?
Go ahead, Rob.
I put it together for the rec fields. I will get something together, talking with the architect tomorrow actually, and I will look at what the operational costs will be for the event/rec center.
Awesome, perfect.
Any other questions on that and that we can think of on that project? Yeah, my only thought there would be definitely, I guess, Sean, Audrey, I mean, if you guys have any thoughts, I mean, do you have any direction on what you guys believe the council would want to see? Because really, we're not going to be involved with financing and operational costs. Is there anything you direct Gretchen and Rob to do on that part? Because that's kind of like not our area, which is what I think John and Tony were trying to get a feel. Any feedback?
I can't speak for Audrey, but I will say that was a question that I was actually contemplating and just asking when I heard that comment is, what is an acceptable ongoing cost? The council has never talked about what an acceptable ongoing cost is. And on Monday night, they talked about, the expense of maintaining a bubble into the future. And again, people will say, well, it was very expensive. I don't know what that means. That is a very subjective term, and saying what will be the ongoing costs and asking where the council sits on that, Matt, to be quite honest, I have no idea, because there's certain things we can do that are revenue enhancing of these certain things, and is that going to be taken into account? If you can have rental, that could be in some of these event centers and that's coming in, or if you can rent the bubble, that's revenue coming in. So that to me is a very hard subjective question, and so I don't know. To be quite honest, my threshold would probably be a little bit higher, because those things that can generate revenue do matter. And if so, we're going to have that discussion about ongoing costs. Revenue enhancement is going to have to be part of that conversation as well.
Go ahead, Audrey.
I just have to take this opportunity to give Councilmember Meske a little grief, because all of that was in the nice presentation that was given to Public Works with some of that. And I don't know what the ongoing costs are. My concern right now is, can we afford to do it next year? There are going to be ongoing costs when we do it. The question I have is, when you're looking around and wondering what we're going to do with our budget, can we afford to do it next year? Or are we just going to get ready and wait until the right time? And so to me, it has to be there to see what it's going to be, or how we would do revenue enhancements. We talked about that same thing with the bubble, about being able to bring people here. But is it 2 years from now? Is it 5 years from now? I think that those figures have to be looked at to see whether it's something that's 2021 or, with that. And that's just my opinion. That's part of the package. We can't just put it up and leave it closed.
Sounds good. Thank you, Audrey. Okay, do you have a question? Sorry, I didn't see who raised their hand. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to say a wise man told me a long time ago, but he happened to be the council president at the time in the city I was working. And he said, the voters voted on these projects, and to build them and not operate them would be ridiculous. The voters already said operate those facilities because we want them. Now, maybe they didn't know what it was going to cost and they didn't know what their taxes were going to do, but they voted for it. The unique thing about the rec fields is that they had $8 million worth of projects and only $6 million worth of budget. And then you get into the discussion of which one would be better to have because of this one has high operating costs, but these don't. And how do you get the best bang for the buck? And that's how that operating cost came into play. Now, from my perspective, if you do the event center and you build the event center within your budget, that's what the voters voted for. The problem is the implementation of that by the elected body saying, you know, you guys are going to see a 3% increase in property taxes, so we can operate that. You know, that's the real world. And that's what, I think that's what Audrey is saying. We'd like to know the operating costs so that we can explain it when people call us up at 10 o'clock at night and complain about their taxes going up. So that's how I look at this. The voters already approved it. You have to take some part of their vote into play, and the council then has to implement it. And that's a hard thing to do when you've got, you know, COVID times and the economy maybe not as strong as you would hope it to be. But that's the world we find ourselves in. So just a few comments.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Brian. Go ahead, Gretchen.
So at the risk of sounding really, really naive, because I'm sure this is how this is going to sound, but why would we be putting the time and energy we are into these if it wasn't for sure that we would use them? I'm like honestly shocked that there's even the question of being able to operate these things. Why would we have ever started this process if that wasn't an absolute for sure? Crickets.
Audrey?
We did a $30 million local option sales tax. It's going to be paid over 13 years. No one said every project had to be done in the first 2 years or the first 3 years. Do we want them? Yes. Can we afford them? That's the question. You know, and so I believe Mr. Gramitz wanted, I think it was his intent, that we get the design ready to go so when we can afford to do it, we can do them. That's how I heard it. And that's what he was pushing for, was to get through the design so we know where we're at. I truthfully, until we hear what's going on at the state level, I'm worried about layoffs next year. I'm worried about having to make budget cuts. The local option sales tax projects are something this community needs when the time is right. And to say, you know, to think that we could do $30 million worth of projects in 2 years, and Mr. Gramitz is right, we're gonna have to raise taxes, but we raised taxes 3% this year. What are we gonna do next year? We got other projects we're talking about. So you wanna bring a 10% increase so that we can do all of these projects at one time? I don't think the community is gonna buy that. And I think that's our responsibility as council members to analyze that and say, you know, wait, the event center is going to have to wait 2 years. Yeah, we got that with it. And I don't know that right now. That's not my intent, but I think we need that information to be able to answer that question.
I got a couple comments on, go ahead. Sorry, Gretchen.
No, you go.
Just a couple thoughts. Number one, just to recap, when we presented this, 7 of the 8 council members voted to support us going to the public. 1 abstained. Okay. So, you know, this is what the people voted for, over 60%. And many people live just outside the utilities that are hooked up. It would have been, if it was a school board vote, in my opinion, it would have been a massive, more than the 61%. So they voted for that. They want things, that they believe in that. We want to be a regional center. We want people to build houses. We want people to come here. We want people to expand their jobs and their businesses and grow because they can hire people, because they think this is a good community to attract and retain people. However, back to Audrey's point, and we could probably close this out because we should probably keep moving. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and that is a real situation where we do have a situation that we do need to be careful with operational costs of some of these facilities. However, we need to keep in touch, and like I said, just keep working on your project. I think, like I said, it's something nobody in the right mind would have ever thought we would be dealing with this. Thankfully, we weren't 100%, didn't have every I dotted and every T crossed 2 years ago, but I'm still glad we went for the 30 million, because I can tell you what happened to the people that were trying to pass one in 2020, that nothing happened. So this is a benefit to our community. We are also, back to the numbers and the financials, we're also solving a lot of problems with this money that could have possibly been solved the last 15 years from the council on just a lot of stuff. The infrastructure, Robbins Island, that's all infrastructure. So you can look at it many different ways, and we probably shouldn't get a philosophical conversation tonight, but I just wanted to make a couple points. I appreciate what everybody's comment. Any other comments, Gretchen? Otherwise, we're going to move on. Go ahead.
One follow-up question, just so I understand, because I haven't been part of this from the very, very get-go. When you talk about the 30 million over 13 years, that is purely to build and create these projects, not operate them, correct? So the operating cost is separate.
That's correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. Great.
Thank you for your work, Gretchen. Appreciate all the hard work. Let's move on to Swanson. Mary.
Hi. We are working on getting all the information from the construction manager to bring to the Swanson subcommittee. And at that time, the Swanson subcommittee will come up with the plan of cutting $400,000 that we need to cut, and then we'll move forward.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Any other questions on Swanson? Otherwise, go ahead, Audrey.
Sorry to keep talking, but I'm an advocate for doing these projects right. And so when I hear cutting 400,000, I'm concerned about what's being cut, or, you know, and you know, not only operating costs, but the city has to support these projects too. And so once again, you know, it's hard to see us, if there aren't cuts that can be made, that can happen later. If we're compromising the actual design to make cuts, I have an issue with that. Versus, you know, maybe the other fields shouldn't be done right now. Maybe all the energy has to go into one. I have no clue, because I haven't paid any attention to it. I'm just expressing an opinion that in my mind, this community needs us to do these right and do it right. And even if there's a component that has to wait for the city to work on it later, or another local option sales tax, but to me, don't make cuts that are going to compromise the integrity of us being able to go to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and market our community. And let's do it right if we're going to do it. That's where I'm at with it too. So I'll quit.
I think that's a good point. I agree with what you said there. Thank you. Anything else on Swanson? Otherwise, we'll keep rolling here. Robbins Island. Rob, is there anything on Robbins Island? I don't see anybody on Robbins Island. Is that pretty nothing, no new update, or is there anything?
There's probably a little information. You know, the group is looking at, you know, the shelters and the designs and everything. They've also mentioned about bringing Bolton and Mink back on to oversee that project and everything. We did get a proposal in from Bolton and Mink. I know that Rachel was going to bring that through her subcommittee. It would fit into the scope of the budget. So then we would have a professional leading that project.
Sounds good. Thank you, Rob. Any questions on Robbins Island? Audrey.
Sorry, but looking at the drawings that were attached, I'm just going to express a concern about spending money on, what's the shelter's name? The old shelter.
Lions.
Gurry.
When I drive down that road, I see safety issues for as close as that shelter is to the road, and I'm I will ask that question again, but I saw the designs, and the designs are great for the new shelters. I'm just wondering whether we're making the right decision to try to salvage an old shelter and spend money on that. So that's just a question for me.
So, and maybe somebody can get that to the subcommittee to talk to them about that. Maybe Rob, if you can make a few notes and just bring that to their attention. So,
Yep, I will do it.
thank you. So community center, I don't see Julie. Anybody got anything on the community center? I'm not going to assume anything. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just a quick note is that the city staff has been working with the Willmar 10 on the potential JCPenney site on the legal aspect of it. I just had some emails today with Dion Warren to move it to the kind of talk about the next stage where they can put pen to paper and get better numbers, on the City Hall Community Center potential development. I have apprised them that anything they stick into it, there has been no approval to go in that direction. There's been no financing yet asserted for that particular project. So they probably shouldn't incur too much cost, but the community center is kind of tied to the City Hall, and it's probably going to work its way through the process, in the next couple of months. I would anticipate that finance committee should probably be looking at some sort of recommendation as how do we do finance City Hall if we're going to proceed, and then from there compare the two projects that are on the table, the existing community center site and the JCPenney site, and make a final determination and say which one are we going to pick, and then head in that direction. So that's a short synopsis, but it should probably take at least 6 months, I would think, to get through that. Easy.
Thank you for that update, Brian. And I will go to Mary.
So the City Hall Community Center, what is the appetite from the Willmar 10 to wait and process this for another 6 months?
That will have to be a discussion point for them to make at that point in time. I don't have the answer to that.
And then we're turning over a new city councilors.
That's part of the reason of the delay. To be quite honest, we're, 2.5 weeks away from new council members coming in. So, no decisions probably would be getting made to make a decision on one location or the other. So for sure, it's going into January.
Thank you. Any other questions?
But just for information, we're talking about operations. As the city council works through the financing of the City Hall Community Center, obviously the $2 million they could sell a bond for to build the community center part, but it's going to take more money than $2 million, okay, in all likelihood. So if in fact the city does an $8.5 million bond, this is getting back to Audrey's comments, that equates to about $850,000 a year in debt payment, roughly. It's slightly less than that, but pretty close, okay? If you go with the Willmar 10 group, that results in, let's say a $6 million expense. And so that's $600,000 a year. $600,000 is roughly a 10% increase in the tax levy. $850,000 is 14% increase in the tax levy. So that's not, that's not chump change. And then we talk about the operational costs of the event center. When we did the Civic Center here in New Ulm, that increased $400,000, custodians and electricity and HVAC and all of those costs. Now we had revenue, so that's why I think Councilor Nelson is concerned, is because you throw a 10% on with another 10% on, and people will be screaming that their taxes have gone up that much. So that's the political reality, is that these things cost money. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's just the city hall. And I wanted, at least, you guys to know, not only do you have your own Invest in Willmar projects, the city council is also dealing with the city hall community center project that it has to make decisions on. So.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brian. Why don't we continue to move forward here? Is there anything on storm? I'm assuming that's a separate project. Unless somebody raises their hand, I'm going to keep moving. So let's go to Steve. One of the reasons I put Steve and Brian on the agenda, I think just a little bit of an update on financing, Steve. The thing that I want to just kind of have a general idea of, it looks like, we've got 5 million approved for bonding, which is going to cover the funding for Swanson. It's going to cover the funding for Robbins Island. So regarding 2021, we've got 6 million on the priority list. The next thing up is the fields. And then we also potentially could have the rec center as well. So we have 6 to potentially 8 million or whatever the numbers are. Can you guys educate us just at a high level? We don't need every detail, but what would the committees, John, Gretchen, or anybody, those would be the next 2 coming down the pipe, need to do or not do, or what do we need to know that you could help guide us, or what do you on the financing as far as potentially funding, or what does that look like for 2021? 6 million fields, and then whatever 8 or 9 or whatever we can get minus professional fees for the rec center. Any updates, Steve, on that?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And Brian, you correct me and chime in if you want, but those are and have been included in the 2021 capital improvement program from the city, along with the street program and any other long-term financing that we'd have to do. We have been in discussions with our bond counsel, with our bond attorneys. So they are on schedule because the council just approved that, but it would come back to the finance committee for further discussion once those committees or projects would be presented to them. We would talk about timing if it is truly going to be in 2021. The first amount that you talked about on the 5 million, that is set. We have confirmation that the issuance costs will be covered or can be covered with the sales tax that's been collected to date. We're just waiting for written confirmation on that. And so the information that was sent out to the committee, you'll notice on there that tomorrow actually we'll receive the reconciling amount for the month of September, through the month of September. So we will have 1 year of actual collections. And that is estimated to be at about 2.2 million, which is about 75% of what the initial projections will be. We were projecting $3 million a year. We'll be at 2.2. So, and one thing you have to remember is that is during the pandemic. Similar to what the state of Minnesota, they were projecting, I believe it was like a $2.4 billion deficit. And the new November forecast came out as a $600 million surplus. And so the unknowns that we had early on have been softened a little bit. I won't say they totally went away, but they've been softened a little bit. And as Brian and I have talked about through this process, is that as this progresses and at the end years, normally the sales tax collection improves as we go along. And we've got 2 previous sales tax projects that have been financed that holds true. So projects are in the capital improvement program, but further discussions as the committee, as the Invest in Willmar group brings their projects forward, the council is aware of it and we'll have further discussions.
Thank you. Steve, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think just to add on is that we'll keep the Invest in Willmar group apprised, but it might be that the 6 to 16 million, we'll just use the maximum, that gets split over 2 years, 21 and 22. I mean, we'll work that through. Those are the details that that Steve and our bond consultants and attorneys will work through. I don't know that you guys need to be too concerned about how, more or less. We just need to know when. When is the money needed so we can schedule these financial transactions to occur? And we're going to be monitoring and keeping you guys apprised of where we are in our collections. Because as Steve pointed out, if you're only receiving 75% right now, I don't know that we can say, we're going to do all $30 million worth of projects. It might be, as Audrey stated, that we'll get to those over the life of the 13 years that we can levy the sales tax, but it may not be all at once up in front, in the first 1 or 2, 3 years. So that will come back to as information to you guys when we get it and when decisions need to be made. But normally that stuff will just be handled financially through the city council.
Sounds great. Any other questions for Brian or Steve? Go ahead, Sean.
I don't have a question, just a comment. There's been some discussion about pushing these things off when there's an appetite for the financing. Also realize the farther you push them down the road, the less your dollars are going to be able to purchase as well. At some point, when you push it too far down the road, the costs are going to go up substantially and you may not be able to do much of the project. That's another thing I just want to put out there into the atmosphere. That's another issue that happens. Sometimes you get so far down the road that it's unrealistic to do the project anymore. So I would suggest that some of those things, you have a reasonable time frame so that the exploding inflation doesn't kill your project.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sean. Steve?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, and that's very true, is that right now it is probably the most favorable interest rates that we will see for a while. And so there's a number of different factors that one has to take into consideration. And so the ability to pay is always the major issue.
Yeah. I would concur, Matt, but I just throw this out there, that part of the financing requirements is that you have to have 110% of revenue compared to your debt. So as we incur the debt, it's not the timing, it's not the total price of the project, it's going to be what is the maximum amount we can go into debt for and sell bonds. That's the controlling factor. And if you can't sell bonds, you're not going to do the project, more than likely, because the city doesn't have pockets full of money. So we have to balance how much revenue is coming in to how much debt it can offset. And every project needs 10% buffer before we can sell the bonds. And that's why the 5 million that wasn't even a question, because we have enough buffer. It's when we throw on another 16 million on top of the 5 when we get really tight, and we may not have 10% buffer. And so then we'll have to delay a piece of the project. And that's the balancing act that staff is going to have to work with when we get the revenue and when we have to sell the bonds. It's a dance, if you want to call it that, a balancing act, but it has nothing to do with the worthiness of the project. It has nothing to do with the wants of the community. It has to do with the legality of being able to sell the bond.
Very good point. Thank you, Steve.
The final point I'd just like to bring up is that as part of that process in the 5-year capital improvement program is that the stormwater work is scheduled to be carried out over the period of the sales tax issue. And so the ability and the relationship and ratios to the debt service, that's a factor that we also take into consideration.
That's a good point. And one of the reasons I kind of wanted to throw this topic on the table is the next project that's up for funding. Again, it's got to go through the process. It's got to be approved. I'm not saying that we're doing anything, but the next one is the fields, and their budget is 6. So I just want to know if you guys get to a situation where in 2021, you don't see bonding 6 for some economic reason or some financing reason that you're communicating with us. If you think we're okay, then I want to keep John and Tony moving on their project, because that's also one that's next on the priority list, but it's also one that's not going to generate a lot of overhead for the city council, because it's not an indoor space that needs staffing and air conditioning and heating and things. Right.
6 is not a problem. It's when we go to the event center, and I would say even another 6 is not a problem. And it could be 8 is starting to get there, but 10 puts us right at the wobble point of whether or not we have 10%. So that's just the reality of it. And so we'll have to make that decision when we get to that point.
Appreciate it. That answers my questions. Anybody else have questions on this topic? And I know you guys everyone knows this, but you could call Steve or Brian anytime and they'd be happy to sit down or go over the phone if you want more specific details. I've done that a couple times just to make sure. Both have been very, very helpful. So I appreciate all the information, both you, Brian and Steve. So thanks for joining us tonight. Very, very helpful. It's a huge part of this whole thing that we need. So on that note, anything else? Otherwise, I think we've got the agenda covered. And I have us down for Wednesday, January 13th at 4 p.m. That's just our standard crazy, but we're into January. But I am willing to meet on a reasonably short notice if there's any kind of topic. Wednesdays seem to work good, but I can always, if there's enough notice, make something work. But if we can stay consistent, that helps, I think. So if next Wednesday or in a couple weeks we wanted to do something before, I will make myself available. I'll block my schedule. But otherwise, that's all I've got for tonight. So on that note, if anybody would like to have any final conversations, otherwise, thanks for all the work, and I'd be open to a motion to adjourn if anybody, unless anybody has something.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So we got a motion to adjourn. I've got a second, and thanks again, everybody. We're adjourned for the evening.
Good night, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.